Hi, this is Paula Judith, and tonight on Spotlight on Romance, we have Candace Blevins. She writes urban fantasy, paranormal romance, contemporary BDSM romance, and two kick-ass motorcycle club series. Ooh, that sounds great. With more than 60 published novels, Candace continues to create stories with strong women, and she pulls from her vast knowledge of mythologies, ancient religions, and history to create a paranormal world that fits neatly into our real one. She also pulls from her decades in the BDSM lifestyle, so much of her work has varying degrees of kink. She lives with her husband of 25 years. Oh, it's probably 26 now, and their
Yeah.
youngest daughter. Their oldest daughter has flown the nest, but frequently comes home for visits. The family's beloved, goofy, retired racing greyhounds are usually at her side as she writes, quietly keeping her company, or sometimes not so quietly. You can visit Candace on the web at candaceblevins.com and feel free to friend her on Facebook at facebook.com/CandaceBlevins, TikTok at tiktok.com at Candace Blevins, and Goodreads at goodreads.com Candace Blevins. We have kind of a little system going here, don't we? You can also join Facebook groups Candace, is that Candaces
Yeah,
Kinksters?
Candace's Kinksters. Yeah.
Okay, to get sneak peeks into what she's writing now, images that inspire her, and her occasional juicy teasers. Thank you so much for joining us today, Candace.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Okay, and tonight we are going to be talking about writing kinky sex scenes. So I will turn it over to you.
Um, I mean, I think you have to feel the sex. Like you have to really kind of get yourself in the mood and whatever you got to do. If you need to go watch a romance movie first or go watch some nice little porn shots or whatever. And then that's kind of what I do for the first draft. And then once I go back and start editing, I don't do that every time because now you're editing, you got to be, but for that first draft, it turns out being pretty rough grammatically. It needs a lot of work to fix. But I don't do that for every single scene, but especially for the really intense scenes and the ones where I want a lot of romance, I tend to those I might watch more of a romance kind of thing to get into it. But I try to be in the mood whenever I write my sex scenes, and I think that helps.
I think you're right there. I remember in my first summit, I interviewed Lisa London from she has a YouTube channel. And she said that if you're not comfortable writing your sex scenes, your readers will know that when they read the sex scenes. So,
Yeah.
um, but I have to ask this question. How do you get the romance into the kinky sex scenes? I mean, I'm not in that world. So, to me, it's like, I just don't see the romance there, but
Okay, so
obviously, it's there for a lot of people.
so think about power exchange. The submissive is giving up her power to the dominant. She's involuntarily, he's not taking it from her, she's giving it away. And the trust involved in that to let someone tie you up and whip you and know that they're going to stop if you say a safe word, that's a ton of trust. And the closeness, I think in some ways BDSM couples are so much closer than regular vanilla couples because of the intensity of the relationship and the trust involved and the things they do, the paths that's led them down. So one of my most favorite reviews happened on like the sixth or seventh book I wrote, and there was two fisting scenes in it. And the first one was a pretty brutal fisting scene, but the second one was full of romance, and there's shooting stars going off in the sky above them, and it's like one of the most romantic scenes I'd written to that point in time. And the very first line of this reviewer's review was, "It takes a talented author to make fisting romantic." But the first thing I thought was that 90% of fisting scenes are incredibly romantic because it's really intense and it really goes places that, so she's clearly never been, but it BDSM gets into really serious romance because of that connection. So, and that's what you've got to write, is that connection that happens. And yeah, all the physical stuff is great too, but romance readers want the romance. So, and I've got 4 books that are not romance. They're dark erotica, and it's just the kink without the romance. And there's people that like that too. But my other 60 plus books are romance. So
I agree with you about the issue of trust. I was married for 45 years before my husband passed away. And I have to say that the longer we were married, the more trust we had in our sex life. And that deepened the connection between us when we uh, partook.
but I mean, I've been in the lifestyle since my early 20s, and I'm rapidly approaching 60 now. So a long time. And my husband and I met through the lifestyle, and we've been ups and downs. As you know, when the kids were little, we had a couple of years that weren't so intense. And then now one child's still here and the other's moved out, and the one that's here is works a lot, and she's off doing her own thing most of the time. So but it's I know 90% of the stuff I write I've done. So
Okay.
and the other 10%, I generally have either witnessed it firsthand or I know someone. I don't do electricity. That is my no, that's my hard limit. I don't deal, my body just doesn't handle it very well. But I have a really close friend who's married to an electrician, and her kink is electricity, and they go to some really scary places. So I wrote electricity, really intense electrical stuff, into one of my books, and she read it for me and told me what I had right, and was like amazed that I got some of it right, since I don't do it. But I've watched her at clubs and stuff undergoing it in parties and stuff. So and I've talked to her about why she likes it, because to me this is like, what? No. But anyway, so the stuff that I haven't personally experienced, I still are writing from an experienced place, because I know people who have, and I talk to them. So
Okay.
it's,
So you mentioned clubs, and if I recall from the last time we talked, you said that clubs in the United States are different from clubs in perhaps England or other foreign countries. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
well, they're different in every state because every state has different laws. So I live in Chattanooga, and I went to Atlanta for clubs because there's no clubs in Chattanooga. We are the buckle of the Bible Belt. They're never going to let that happen here. So I went to Atlanta. As it turns out, my husband went to Nashville. So we didn't meet each other for a long time. We kind of accidentally met at some point. But so in Atlanta, you can't have sex in the clubs. There can be no penetration of like a body part into another body part. But dildos and butt plugs are fine. You just can't actually do, a finger is not, but a butt plug is. Go figure. Anyway, so in the clubs in Atlanta, each club has its own rules, but then you have to follow the state law, which is no sex in the club. The swingers clubs, they can have sex in those because they're not doing BDSM stuff. I don't understand who writes the laws or why, but that's the way it is. Tennessee's the same. You can't have sex in the clubs, but it's still a lot more happens than you would think happens. So, um, and we stopped going to clubs right before we had kids. We've been maybe 2 or 3 times in the last 22 years. But before that, we were back and forth to Atlanta all the time. So that was,
Okay.
and
So give us a visual of what it's like inside a club. Is it like one big room or separate rooms, or how does that work?
so our favorite club, there's a front room that's for socializing, and there hardly any play is happening. You may have people kneeling or whatever, but there's no actual play happening in the front room. And then the next room back is a bigger room with devices all in it, and that's the main big. And if there's a show or whatever, that would happen in there. And a lot of people congregate in there. And then there's private rooms. And at our favorite one, it was kind of a first come, first serve basis, but at some you have to reserve those private rooms. So the private rooms, there was one that was set up like a gynecologist office. There was one that was set up with a huge bed, but it was like a bondage bed. It wasn't a mattress. It was just the padding and the leather. And then they had windows, like stained glass windows with lights behind them. So it looked like you were in a like a Victorian setting. The whole thing was like a Victorian setting. So they had like, I don't know, maybe 10 of those rooms that were different themes. And there's no doors, so people can watch from outside the room, but nobody would come into the room once people had a scene going unless they were invited in. And then there was another room behind the main room that was for more intense stuff. And there was usually the dungeon master usually kept an eye on who went back there because someone who was a newbie would not be comfortable going back there. So they just let the people back there who weren't going to freak at what was happening back there. Um, Another club I went to only had the one big playroom and there was no private rooms. There was a socializing room out front and there was a room to the side that was quiet room for aftercare. But then the rest of it was just the one big room. So all clubs have their own thing. The club in Atlanta now is forget what it's called. It's a bunch of numbers, 1763 maybe. Anyway, it's really plush. It's actually been on some specials. You can find it out there, but there's a lot of red velvet and black leather and um, it's kind of the same thing. You got the socializing area, and then you got the bigger area, and then you got some private areas. So and you have different levels of dress. Some girls stay in a lacy bra and panties. Some just go down to a G-string and are topless, and some are completely nude. And that's just whatever. That's between individual people what they're comfortable with.
Okay. Is alcohol served in these clubs?
No, no.
Okay.
And most of the play parties have that rule as well, no alcohol, because they don't want anyone to be under the influence. They want everybody to be completely sober.
Yeah, so they
And
know what they're doing and what
yeah,
other people are
yeah.
saying. If they give that safe word. So, okay. And I don't know. I don't even know what questions to ask you to bring out more of this. But as I recall, you had said one time, the last time that we had talked, was that you can always tell when somebody has not been in the life and they're writing about it, or or they really just don't understand really what's happening, but they
The,
felt like they wanted to write about it.
the reason I started writing in the first place, what, 12 or 14 years ago, was because at the time, most of the ones who were writing BDSM clearly had no clue. They had never felt the kiss of a whip. They'd never actually done power exchange, and I was really annoying. There were three or four that did it really well, but they could only write 3 or 4 books a year, and I wanted more. I got frustrated, and I was like, I could do better than this. So I tried, and I wrote, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 books before I got one that I thought was worth submitting, and I polished it and got some help, and then with the editing, and then submitted it to three, and the one that I wanted most responded back in like 3 or 4 days to ask to see the rest of it, and then offered me a contract. And luckily, well, I actually had done my research. It's not completely luckily, but that was Accessica, which is no longer exists, but it was a wonderful partnership with them for like 10 years until they went out of business. And my first series was contemporary, even though what I like to read when it's not kinky, when it's just regular, is paranormal romance. But I didn't feel strong enough as an author to create an entire world at that point in time. So I stayed with contemporary romance. And each book had characters with their own, it's like different kinks for each book. Um, and I went, this was long before 50 Shades came out. So at the time, what I was writing was like so extreme and so out there. And now it's just like, it's not, I mean, it's still on the extreme side, but it's not anywhere near what it was considered when I first wrote it. But yeah, I really enjoyed, and eventually I'd had a urban fantasy series in my mind for decades that I never thought I'd write because I didn't think I'd ever be a writer. And eventually I felt like I was a strong enough author I could take that on. But absolutely, yes, in the beginning I would get so frustrated with authors who were writing BDSM who had no clue what the lifestyle means. I mean, some were like, if you're submissive, you are required to submit to everyone who calls themselves a dominant. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
That's just crazy. That
Well, and I understand that, as you were saying, so much trust is involved there, and I understand that that the dominant will care very gently for his submissive, or whichever way it goes. I guess it's more
right.
common for a woman to be the submissive.
Yeah, I think it probably is, but not as much more common as you think. There's plenty of male submissives out there. There's a lot more male submissives than I think there are female dominants. So the male submissives are desperately looking for a female dominant. But there are more female switches. And that can go a bunch of different ways. You have some people that she's dominant one week and he's submissive, and the next week they switch. And then you have some that she's always submissive to him, but she's got another one over here that's submissive to her. So, and then some that they have a vacation cabin, and they only switch while they're at the vacation cabin, and when they're home it's always the other way around. So that can work a bunch of different ways for a switch, but that works too. And I've written a couple of switches. That's fun.
Okay, so when we talk about BDSM, is it always submissive dominant, or are there other aspects to it?
Yeah, there's a million aspects. So BDSM is 6 different things. It's bondage and discipline. I think maybe it's 4 different things. Anyway, bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadism and masochism. So it's 3 different things. Um, and so power exchange is part of it. So you can have some people that they don't do the sadism and masochism at all. It's just about the power exchange. And you have some people that are masochists who are not interested in being a submissive. So you have sadists and masochists who play really rough, but there's no power exchange at all. So, and then there's some people that are just into the bondage. They're not into anything else. Just tie me up and leave me for a couple of hours and then come back and get me. And so, that's not me. I get into really comfortable bondage. I don't like the uncomfortable bondage. And there's some people that really want the uncomfortable that makes them stress and strain for, while they're in it. So everybody's got their own kinks, and it's totally, the sky's the limit. It's just whatever the 2 people involved, or 3 people, however many there are, agree to.
Okay, and how do people always go to these clubs? Well, probably not as couples, because you said you met your husband at a club. But is it common for singles to go in and get into the mix, or is it more common for couples to go?
There's a lot of singles. There's a lot of couples too. Some clubs have nights so that it's singles nights and there aren't any couples there. And there's another night that's couples nights and there aren't any singles there. And they only do that like maybe once a month or once every month. That's not an every week kind of thing. But for couples who aren't familiar having singles, or who aren't comfortable having singles around, they may just go on those. And same thing with the singles. If they don't want to have to worry about somebody's with someone or not, then a singles night's nice for them. But no, when you're on a general night, you've got singles and couples, and um submissives with a collar get left alone. Submissives without a collar get hopefully politely engaged with. So yeah.
Okay, and what does the collar symbolize other than I'm not available?
Collar means you're owned.
Oh,
Like you put your collar on your pet. You've got a
oh,
dog, you put a collar on it, and it shows it belongs to somebody. It's kind of the same
oh,
thing with submissive. The collar shows you belong to somebody.
oh, okay. And is is that somebody that you have arrived with, or meeting there, or is it just a once in a while
Again,
thing?
that depends on the couple. I have a necklace that I wear all the time. Um, that's it just looks like a necklace. Nobody knows that it symbolizes a collar. Um, and then at the clubs, it was a very obvious collar because you don't want just a necklace to be there. But some people, yeah, the dominant will say, "Can I collar you for this scene?" And then take it back off. and some, once the collar goes on, that again, that depends. It's whatever the couple agrees on. There's no absolute rule, except that if someone's wearing a collar, they're owned by somebody.
Okay. Now I've heard, and I don't know if it's true, so I'm hoping that you can tell us that when people enter into this relationship, this submissive dominant relationship, or maybe anything else, that they have contracts of what they will agree and not agree to. Um, is this true?
It's a good idea because verbal contracts, a verbal agreement is easy to mistake, or to say, I was mistaken, I thought you said. And if it's all written down, it's a good idea. It's never going to be it's never going to go into a court of law. A judge is never going to say, yes, you have to abide by this contract. It's just between the two people to put everything in black and white to what you're agreeing to. And there are hard limits and soft limits. So a soft limit is something that you absolutely cannot do right now, but at some point in the future, I might change my mind. But for now, this is the limit. And a hard limit is like me with electricity. It's never going to happen. I don't care if we're together 20, 30, 40 years. You're never shocking me with my approach. That's not going to happen. I was a ballerina for 17 years, so I have really bad feet. Anything to do with my feet is also a hard limit. No tickling, no bastonado, which is beating the bottom of the feet. There's no pulling on my toes, no needles in my feet, nothing. Right. So everybody has their own hard limits. And it's a really good idea to have those written down. Soft limits too. You want all of it, but it's a good idea to understand up front. Hey, if this is one of your kinks, I'm not the person for you because I'm never going there.
Okay.
So
Okay. And so are these contracts for couples with long-term relationships, or can they be even for tonight?
they're pretty involved. So it's usually once you start getting serious, you usually share your hard limits up front just to make sure if it's just for tonight, that's not as big of a deal. Tonight, all you need to know is what you can and can't do tonight. But if you're looking at possibly long term, then you want to get those hard limits out pretty soon because if that's the other person's kink, then you're not compatible. Um, but they're pretty involved. I mean, there's a bunch of them online. You can go in and then make put into Microsoft Word and then adapt it to what you want. And some of them are 20 or 30 pages long.
Oh my goodness.
And you can delete the stuff that's not applicable or just say this is not happening or whatever. But it's not something for you. The full on contract is not for just a night. It's for hey, we're getting serious. We should come. Once you're getting into a big time power exchange kind of thing.
Yeah.
But at a club, there's dungeon masters at the clubs, so they're not going to let it. There's always a club safe word, which is almost always red, and if someone shouts red, then a dungeon master is going to step in and stop it. So it's pretty safe to play in a club because there's people around who will make sure things get stopped. So you kind of share and come to an agreement of what this scene is going to be. And then, so there doesn't have to be a little bit of negotiation, but usually in 5 or 10 minutes, you can get it out and then you can get started. So
Okay. Okay. And how long does a person usually go to a club? I mean, is this like an hour thing, 3 hour thing, 10 hour thing?
it's not cheap. So while you're there, you may as well stay there a while.
Good point. I don't know why was it in my head. It's like, hey, I have nothing else to do tonight. Let's go to the club.
Well, and there's different levels. Some of them you have to be once you're a certain member, then you don't pay every time. But then there's also membership levels where you pay this to be a member, but then you also pay 30 or 40 or $50 entrance fee. And if it's a big night, it might be $100 entrance fee if they're doing a special theme or something. So um, but yeah, I mean, you get there, you have dinner, and then you go, and then you stay till midnight or 1 or 2 in the morning, and you can leave early if it's not working out for you. But generally speaking, once you go, you make a night of it.
Okay. Okay. So are clubs open during the day or are they pretty much an evening affair?
Most of them are evening stuff. Some of them have weekend stuff during the day. Um, but that tends to be more like classes and demonstrations and that kind of thing, and
Okay.
not.
Okay, so let's say that a person's writing a scene, they're two main characters of whatever gender they are, go to this club or they meet up at the club, whatever. Kind of run us through how a scene might run, especially when romance is involved.
So I don't know that a whole lot of romance happens at the club. The clubs are more about meeting and being seen and watching others, and it's more of a show type demonstration. Not no, demonstration is not the right word, but it's a lot about showmanship and about there's not even for a couple that's super romantically attracted to each other. They've got that. Not a lot of that happens at the club. It's too it 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 it's hard to explain. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but it's kind of like, having a French kiss that gets way involved in an elevator full of people. You don't, right? It's like, yeah, you French kiss, you can do all of that in the club, but it doesn't generally turn into the sappy stuff. There's a little, especially towards the end, it can be really caring and gentle, but it's not the fireworks type of stuff that happens in books. And you can write that. There's nothing wrong with writing it, I don't think, but that's not the reality.
Okay, so if you're writing a romance, a BDSM romance, then I presume all of the getting to know each other, the vulnerability, the carrying back and forth, that's all outside of the club.
Yeah, and you do normal stuff too. I mean, you go out to eat and you watch movies and you go for long walks and all the stuff that normal romantic relationship that happens too. It's just that once you start having sex, there's other stuff involved besides just a bed and.
Okay. Okay. All right. Um, are you open to answering questions?
Sure.
Okay. If anybody would like to ask Candace any questions, this is the time to do it. And you can leave your cameras off if you're not comfortable with your face on camera. I don't see anybody unmuting themselves, but if you're going to ask a question, you can either put it in the chat or unmute yourself. Okay, I don't see any questions. Okay. Well, I don't know any other questions to ask you. Anything else that you care to share with us about?
Um, Okay, so with my themed books that are more on the BDSM, the kinky side, um, there's levels of so light kink, medium kink, extreme kink. My gauge is not the same as everybody else's. My first motorcycle club book, I was like, I'm going to write a vanilla book, and I thought it was vanilla. I completely thought it was vanilla, and my readers were like, I don't think you know what that word means. And I was like, this is not a kinky. And they start pointing out stuff that I thought was vanilla. And I'm like, no, that's just regular sex. They're like, no, no, that's kink. so so I have some books. The ones that I think are light kink are more medium kink. And the ones that I think are more medium kink are but I have really heavy kink too. So you can write the levels and there's nothing that says you have to go all the way into heavy, whatever. And then you've got the different. So I've got a reverse harem series, 3 guys and 1 girl. You can have a lot of fun with that. Um, and especially if some of them are, werewolves and vampires and other things, because that's the great thing about werewolves is because they can just shift and heal. So something that might take a human a month to heal from. So you can have way more fun if you don't have to worry about all that healing time. So there's a lot of places you can go with it. I also have some male stuff. Um, and some of the reverse harem, some of them the swords cross, and some of them the swords don't cross. But
I'm
my
sorry,
mother's.
you lost me there. I don't
Oh,
understand
okay,
the
swords
sword
cross. Okay,
crossing.
you got three guys and one girl in bed. If the swords cross, then the guys are doing each other too.
Oh,
If the
okay.
swords don't cross, then the guys are only doing the girl. They're not doing each other.
Okay. All right. Obviously, I am unfamiliar with a lot of this stuff. So, okay, I guess I do have a couple questions. Now, you had mentioned that some people are just into bondage and all they want to do is be tied up. So obviously, there's probably little or no pain involved with that, other than being uncomfortable for an extended period of time.
You'd be surprised how much pain can be involved. Think of it's uncomfortable positions that strain the muscles and that you have to balance yourself or you'll hurt yourself worse. So some of those bondage scenes can be super intense. Um, Not my kink at all, but they can get super, super intense. And then there's some of them, it's more relaxing bound things. So you can look, there's Japanese, it's called shibari, and it's a really, really intricate, fancy rope work that's gorgeous. And some of that's also uncomfortable, but some of it is perfectly balanced so that there's some comfort there, even though there's a lot of restrictions. But over time, they float. Apparently, they go off to somewhere else floating. So, yeah, there's to me, it's hard to write those scenes because I mean, you have to write an hour in like seven, just a couple of paragraphs because how exciting is it to be bound for an hour with nobody touching you, right? But there, I've read authors who would do it really well, and they probably enjoy that. That's probably why they can do it really well. But I tend to make those a little shorter because it's difficult for me to make those really good. And I don't do a whole lot of that. Most of the time, if I've got somebody bound, they're being whipped because that's my thing. So,
Okay. Yeah, and I do know a woman that she and her boyfriend um, got into that along with some other friends. Um, but she said that they weren't bound for very long. It's like, okay, we're all tied up. And she showed me some pictures, 5 minutes to take pictures and then untie everybody. And it was like, spend all this time tying you up only to take a few pictures and untie you. Um, was a little bit strange to me, but
bondage for me is wrist and ankle cuffs that go on and stay on. And then there's all kinds of tie-off points that you can be clipped to. So you can be bound in a position and be there for 20 or 30 minutes and then unbound from that one and clipped into a different position. And now you're in this one. It's not, we don't generally get into the really advanced, involved bondage. It's just, once you've got the ankle cuffs and the wrist cuffs on and a collar that can, with the big D ring in the front, you can bind everything really quickly if you've got all the connection points, and it doesn't take long.
okay. And for the rest of that, is something of a nature of pain involved? I mean, you had mentioned whipping. I can't imagine being on the receiving end of that one because I would probably hit back. You know, I remember talking to a chiropractor one time. I was taking karate at the time, and I said, I have an agreement with you. You don't hurt me, and I won't hurt you.
So you've heard of, how runners have that runner's high, that's
Hmm.
endorphins. So
Right.
those same endorphins are what you get in a well constructed scene.
Okay.
So, especially for beginners, you start out with a flogger, a really nice flogger that just stings a tiny little bit. And you go a little harder, a little harder, a little harder. And then before long, she's wanting more. And then you switch to a flogger that's not so nice. And then you eventually work your way up to something that's would be brutal to start out with.
Okay.
Same thing with a belt. People usually start with a paddle first, which is a much bigger area and builds up a lot of heat, and then you eventually work to the belt. Punishment scenes would start with the belt because you don't want to be warmed up. It's supposed to hurt. It's supposed to be a bad hurt, not a good hurt. And that's the thing is you got with BDSM is you have a good hurt versus a bad hurt. The good hurt is yummy and it may look like it should hurt, but it gets those endorphins stronger and stronger and stronger. And then I think there's probably some symbiosis in there of endorphins versus blood going to your nether regions. And listen to me saying it by the nice names instead of the romance names. Um, with my kids, we call it our girly bits. So anyway, with all the blood headed to, well, to your clit, we'll just say the way we write it,
Uh-huh.
that I think it all works together to make you horny once you start being flogged, and it all just works. And some submissives can orgasm just from being whipped and flogged. Some need a little extra attention paid places, but it all builds to a huge crescendo, which it's I rarely orgasm during vanilla activities, very
Mhm.
rarely. So for me, the orgasm during a scene is, 4th of July fireworks going off.
Okay.
And I don't know if people get that during vanilla or not, but I don't. So
Okay. All right. So if we want to be writing even what you would consider vanilla into our books, we're still working with a slow build up to whatever it is that we're happening. I'm really glad that you explained about starting, with like a really light thing and then you work your way up. I presume that's all in one evening or perhaps over a period of time to
no,
get
no,
somebody
it
used to
has
it.
to be in, unless you're a really super experienced submissive who wants it right off the bat. You go slow to up in the one evening because you're that blood flow and the heat that you're building up. It's called being properly warmed up is what it's called. So you need that every single time. You've got to work up to it. If it's That's why I said a properly constructed scene. You
Okay.
work up to the really super extreme stuff. And some people might get there in 10 minutes, and some people it might take 30 minutes to get there. um, and for some things, stuff that it maybe took me 20 minutes to get worked up to 20 years ago, 3 or 4 minutes now, and I'm there because
Okay.
it just was it with anything. You go up the slope and get experienced and used to things. So
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I
it's like
understand that.
the first spanking scene for a woman who wants to be spanked but has never been spanked before. Might be something like bending over someone's lap with a skirt on and panties on. And they spank her over the skirt, and then they lift the skirt up and they spank her over the panties, and then eventually pull the panties down with a hand and spank her over the hand, and maybe move up to a paddle at some point. And then when she's ready, then some fingering happens and she has an orgasm because you want it to end on a happy note. And that's it. That might be a first scene for someone who's never been in the scene before. And it's not, there's some pain involved, but it's good pain. There's none of it's bad pain.
Okay.
So
Okay. So in writing it, we still, whether it's an experienced person or not, we still want to have that build up.
yes.
Okay. All right. And I think that's the important thing. The thing about you walk into the club and then you go into a room and all of a sudden you're into this intense thing. I guess that's what you're talking about when you were saying it just, it was frustrating to read things that were just, that's not how it's done.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you go into a club, there's cages in almost all the clubs. And there'll be some submissives in cages because their dom or whatever has put them there. And that's their kink, obviously. But someone, if it's not their kink to go in a cage, they're probably not going to be in the cage unless it's their dom's kink and they've worked out negotiations. Okay, that's not my kink, but I'll do this if you'll do this to me. And right. So outside of power exchange is when you have all these negotiations. And then once the power exchange starts, then the submissive no longer has a say because the dom does what he wants within those guidelines that you've worked out.
Okay.
So
And
the
if, and
say
if,
is a safe word which stops everything, and
right.
then all the fun stops. So
Right. So, yeah. So if we've agreed upon this and you go farther than that, I say the safe word and
I don't trust you anymore, and that's probably the end of it.
yeah. And did you call him a dungeon guard or what did you call him?
A dungeon master.
A dungeon
There's
master.
there's some jokes out there because in the geek play where they do all the make believe, there's dungeon masters there too. No, DM is it's not dungeon master. Anyway, the joke is you ask someone what a DM is, and they'll tell you either a dungeon master for BDSM, and I know it, and I just can't say it right now because I've done the game. But anyway, So, but yeah, dungeon master are the ones that have the say over what happens and what doesn't happen. And there's, if you're going to do something extreme, there usually the club will say you can't do this unless you've talked to the dungeon master about it ahead of time. And most of the clubs have, so if you're going to play with needles, so if there's going to be blood, they've got a certain section of the club set aside for that. That's kind of away from everybody else and that can be easily sterilized afterward. Um, some clubs have a place for water sports, which is when you pee on people.
Mm.
Most don't allow that. There's a kinky campground that happens in Georgia every year, and they have a whole little section full of pools because the campground doesn't want human pee in their grass. So they have little kiddie swimming pools set up in one section. So you go do it in the human in the kiddie pools on that section. So there's different, yeah.
Yeah.
Kinky campground, you get there Thursday and you leave Sunday or Monday, and it's all weekend long. You get to stay in Power Exchange.
Okay. Okay. Anything else that we need to know if we want to write this into our romance novels?
I think reading stuff that has been written by people who are in the lifestyle is good because it gives you more of an idea of the actuality of it. But because not everybody, I mean, some people are interested in it and they've done a little bit, but they haven't gone far, right? So reading some of the more extreme stuff, I do think if it's someone who's experienced it, that can be a jump start because to my mind is write what you know. So that's kind of where I went. I started out with BDSM romance because that's what I wanted to read. That's also write what you want to read. Um, so, but really nothing hits the bar of actually experiencing yourself so you can describe it. So,
Okay. Okay. So either go and figure it out or read about it.
well, and there are, I do know people who have talked to clubs in their city and let them know I'm an author and I just want to experience this. And the club will put them with an experienced Dom who will then let them experience some things that they want to experience, even if it's just for writing purposes. That a lot of clubs are more than happy to do that. So,
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know because um, it's just like if you're going to be writing a police mystery or something. I mean, go talk to the police. They will tell you what they can tell you, and there are probably a few things that they keep secret because they don't necessarily want the whole world to know. But I was talking to somebody the other day, and it was like they were going to write this thing about these people. They walk into the police station and they go back to the detective's desk. Well,
that doesn't work that
no,
way.
no, it just doesn't work that way. So you need to find out how it does work, and that's true on any of our writing. I think. I mean, it's a little bit hard to go back 200 years and say, well, let's see what it's really like to do this, that, or the other thing. But we can do our research and going to a club and saying, hey, I'm researching this for a novel. That's kind of a novel idea.
Yeah.
Candace, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. I really do appreciate this. It will go up onto my YouTube channel for all the spotlights on romance, and I will notify the members of the Facebook group and let them know. And thank you so very much. Oh, what? Oh, very. Okay, Catherine says it was very informative. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I respond quickest if you want to message me for something. I respond fastest on Facebook Messenger. Email, I have to do that on the computer. Messenger, I've usually comes across on my phone and it's a little quicker. So,
Okay, so
but,
Candace is open to answering questions if you have them. Thank you so
but
much, Candace. I
thank you so
appreciate it.
much. Bye
Okay,
bye.